On September 24th, 1996, Weezer released their long-awaited follow-up album, and the crowd went mild. Despite releasing 3 singles that were minor alternative radio hits, the commercial and critical reception was mixed at best. Over the last 25 years, the album has become a classic that's adored by critics and fans alike. This wasn't the first time, nor would it be the last time this happened. My name's AJ of Geekscape, and these are the top 10 critically acclaimed but commercial flop follow-up albums. Number 10, Smashing Pumpkins' Adore. In the thick of the Seattle grunge boom, Chicago's The Smashing Pumpkins found themselves in a musical movement that they could sink their teeth into. Siamese Dream hit the radio hard with singles like Cherub Rock, Disarm, and Today, and their follow-up double album was massive with singles like Bullet with Butterfly Wings, Zero, 1979, and Tonight Tonight, a strong contender for Best Song of the 90s. The pressure for a follow-up was heavy. After 3 years, Smashing Pumpkins finally released their 4th long-awaited album, Adore. The album, which vocalist Billy Corgan later described as the sound of a band falling apart, was well received by critics, including some calling it the best album up to that point. The lyrics were praised for their poetic verbiage and described as being like reading a private diary entry. Critics also praised the musical shift, which abandoned the soaring rock anthems for a more subdued and even at times electronica-inspired sound. However, the fan response was much less positive. While the album debuted at number 2 on Billboard, it quickly fell off the charts and sold just a fraction of the previous albums. Corgan primarily blamed himself for referring to the album as their quote-unquote techno album, feeling that the album was actually more of an acoustic album. He also said the title was a pun no one got, that Adore, A-D-O-R-E, was a door or a new entrance to the band's sound. In the years since, the album has become beloved to many fans, but it's still 20 plus years later looked at as the album that killed the Pumpkins. Number 9, The Byrds, Sweetheart of the Rodeo. The history of the Byrds is basically like the history of 3 different bands. They burst into the music scene in the mid-60s with anthems like Mr. Tambourine Man and Turn, 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 and they're frequently connected to the hippie movement of the 60s. A few years later, they slowly transformed into a more psychedelic sound, like 8 Miles High and the Notorious Byrd Brothers. However, their 6th album, Sweetheart of the Rodeo, was one move too far for their audience. At this time in the band's career, they added Graham Parsons to their lineup, and he suggested they do primarily a country album. Critics celebrated the change of sound with the album, receiving multiple 5-star reviews. Despite the critical praise, their audience was left feeling abandoned. Country music at this point was the antithesis of the sound of the counterculture. This led to the album being the lowest selling in the Byrds' career. While The Risk ultimately was the beginning of the end of the band, it can also be looked at as an album ahead of its time, predating future country-inspired rock bands like the Eagles, America, and Dr. Hook in the 1970s. Number 8, MGMT. Congratulations. MGMT's debut album, Oracular Spectacular, and its lead single, Time to Pretend, was an instant cultural explosion. The song was inescapable, appearing in trailers, movies, TV shows, and commercials. The follow-up singles, Kids and Electric Feel, only further pushed the band into the stratosphere. Music publications didn't just praise the album at its time of release, but it also quickly made its way onto multiple lists of the greatest albums of all time. With such high praise so soon, obviously there was a lot on the line for the heavily anticipated follow-up. Seeing how well a dramatic genre change had gone for the Byrds and Smashing Pumpkins, MGMT decided to go for a dramatic genre change, releasing a much more guitar-driven album as opposed to the more electronic-based sound that made them so popular. Now, the critics swooned, with some even saying the album was an improvement over the debut, but the fans weren't buying it. There were even rumors that the record label was pressuring MGMT to fast-track a new album that sounded more familiar to what people expected. Over time, the feelings on the album seemed to be changing. In January of 2020, Brooklyn Vegan even referred to the album as the Pinkerton of the 2010s. Number 7, NOFX, Heavy Petting Zoo, or Eating Lamb. NOFX is not a band for everyone. While some of their peers were experiencing unexpected mainstream success in 1994, NOFX also got caught up in the punk rock explosion. Green Day addressed boredom, Offspring sang of road rage, Rancid sang of destinations unknown, but NOFX sang about not wanting to be called white and linoleum flooring. Punk and Drublic was an unexpected hit and became the touchstone album in the band's discography. They followed it up with one of their most controversial albums and the most in-your-face album cover with Heavy Petting Zoo. This was the first NOFX record to debut on the Billboard charts, but it also failed to outsell Punk and Drublic. Ultimately, it just exists between two classic NOFX albums, as the following year, the band released the extremely popular So Long and Thanks for All the Shoes. But the album itself is full of truly great songs, like the opening track, Hobophobic, Scared of Bums, or their anti-Jerry Garcia song, August 8th. Fat Mike's metaphors on Heavy Petting Zoo are so layered on songs like Freedom Like a Shopping Cart and Bleeding Heart Disease, but then again there's also idiotic songs like Hot Dog in a Hallway that could easily be done by the Bloodhound Gang and no one would know the difference. Number 6, Marvin Gaye. Here, my dear. Marvin Gaye is one of those artists whose career is so remembered for his tragic end that it's easy to forget how prolific he actually was. From 1961 until 1978, he was a hit maker. While admittedly not every song could be Let's Get It On, What's Going On, or I Heard It Through the Grapevine, every release for 15 plus years had at most a minor charting hit on it. That is until Here, My Dear. This 1978 double disc release was fueled by depression and chaos as his divorce was being finalized. Gaye became nihilistic towards the idea of even making a successful record at first, aiming to just make a quick one. However, soon the idea of writing an album about his divorce began to fascinate him, and he got to work. In a rarity for Gaye up to that point, he wrote all the songs, and the album was primarily made by him and his engineer. Here, My Dear was rejected by audiences and critics alike, and regarded as weird. It became Marvin Gaye's lowest charting album, and his ex-wife even considered suing him. The embarrassed and dejected Gaye quickly refused to promote the album anymore, and throughout the rest of his life ignored the album's existence. Over the following years, however, public opinion of the album has changed, and it's now widely regarded as one of the greatest albums ever made. Number 5, Red Hot Chili Peppers, One Hot Minute. The Red Hot Chili Peppers have as hard of a time retaining a consistent guitarist as they do not writing songs about California. Their most known and loved guitarist was John Frusciante. John unfortunately had the task of joining the band at 18 after the death of founding member Hillel Slovak. He was in the band for 2 of their biggest albums, Mother's Milk and Blood Sugar Sex Magic. He, however, became uncomfortable with fame and quit the band, becoming a reclusive drug addict. He has since rejoined twice over the last 30 years, but during his break from the band, they brought in Jane's Addiction guitarist Dave Navarro. He added a more psychedelic sound to the band. Meanwhile, Anthony Kiedis, the vocalist, relapsed after 5 years, causing the recording to be chaotic in nature. While singles like Aeroplane and My Friends were modest radio hits, the album sold less than half as many records as Blood Sugar Sex Magic. While the critical review at the time was mixed, some critics considered it among the best albums of the year. Navarro was fired in 1998, and Frusciante came back, causing the next album, Californication, to be arguably their best release to date. While the album does fall short of some of the highs of their previous and even their later releases, it's far better than its reception, with some great deep cuts like Warped, Coffee Shop, and Falling Into Grace. Number 4, Green Day, Insomniac. In 2021, Green Day is such a massive hit machine, it's easy to not realize how much of an unexpected fluke their first successes really were. Punk had never been a mainstream genre until Dookie exploded. It was such an unexpected success that the teenagers of Green Day were ultimately banned from where they got their start for being sellouts. Perhaps fueled by the rejection of their peers, their follow-up album was angrier, faster, and much more aggressive. The album greatly undersold Dookie. It could be argued that the choices of singles didn't help, as songs like Stuck With You, Geek Stink Breath, and Brain Stew Jaded were not nearly as catchy as the deeper cuts like Stewart and the Avenue and No Pride. Despite low sales, it was well received by critics who even favorably compared it to Nirvana's In Utero, which is fitting. Similar to Kurt Cobain, their follow-up album seemed dead set on being unmarketable, doing weird choices like performing the untested opening track Armitage Shanks at the VMAs as opposed to one of their more well-known hits, Basket Case. Over the last 25 years, the album has continued to regain the admiration it so desperately deserves, even receiving a deluxe vinyl release this year. Number 3, Fleetwood Mac, Tusk. Following up an album as massive as Rumors is no easy task. Lindsey Buckingham was up for the challenge and crafted a double album of sparser arrangements. Many consider the album the precursor to post-punk. Unfortunately, the audiences of 1979 were not ready for this new direction. The record was considered a commercial disappointment as it only sold 4 million copies as compared to Rumor's 10 million copies. The critics immediately loved the experimental nature of the album, and retrospectively, it's been called timeless and appeared on countless best-of lists. Public opinion in general has continued to grow, helping the album continue to sell well over the past 40 years. Number 2, Weezer, Pinkerton. When you think of critically loved commercial flops, Pinkerton is the album you think of. For example, it's the album that made us think of this list. The album was so poorly received by the fan base that bassist Matt Sharp quit the band, and they went on a half-decade-long hiatus. Vocalist Rivers Cuomo started to believe that both Pinkerton was and that the Blue Album was a fluke. However, over the hiatus, something happened. The world began to connect to the songs and the lyrics. Critics reevaluated the album and praised it. Fans connected with the sincere and honest lyrical approach. When Weezer returned, Cuomo still rejected the album and the cult following, saying that it was a hideous album and it was a painful mistake that wouldn't go away. The later albums for years were focused on more simple pop songs, and it seems like Weezer has been cursed ever since to release albums that people don't fully appreciate until 5+ years after they're released. Number 1, the Beastie Boys, Paul's Boutique. The Beastie Boys are considered one of the finest rap groups of all time, but it could have fallen apart so quickly. After changing their sound from punk rock to hip-hop, the Beasties' full-length debut, Licensed to Ill, was an immediate classic. Through the power of MTV and their fearless touring and insane stage show, the band became a cultural icon. The world eagerly anticipated the follow-up, but no one was prepared for what they'd actually get. Paul's Boutique changed the game on rap music and sampling in general, pulling from such bizarre sources as movie scores, bong rips, and obscure classic rock deep cuts. Critics were quick to praise the Dust Brothers' production and change in Beastie's sound, but audiences were not ready for their snotty frat boys to mature. However, the album grew over time, leading to it becoming a double platinum release and getting a special 20th anniversary release in 2009. Many consider it the Sgt. Pepper of hip-hop, and some would go as far as to call it one, if not the, best rap album ever made.